Okay, so here is colonial life. Okay, so first off, you had three regions. You had New England, which was basically the northern colonies. Okay, they got most of their stuff from farming, fishing, and trading. The middle colonies mostly involved in staple food production or crop production because tobacco was a big one there in the middle colonies. And then the southern colonies centered around production of cash crops such as tobacco and rice. So the whole idea of colonies is based off of mercantilism, which means that a system of nations increasing their wealth and power through trade with colonies. Basically, the colonies would provide the raw goods, and the mother nation would take those raw goods and convert them into a product and make money off of it. Okay, so England wanted a favorable balance of trade. Basically, they wanted to get something for cheap, so that way they could end up making a lot of profit off of it. Also, it meant that they would get the raw goods from the colonies, but then sell them a lot of times the finished product. So again, making sure that the colonies bought more from them than they bought from the colonies. So English control. Colonies were very successful traders with Native Americans and also with other countries. Parliament passes the Navigation Acts in 1649. This restricted how and with who the colonists could do business with. Now you can imagine if you are trying to trade, then this makes you very angry because now Parliament has basically said you can only trade with England and English ships, whereas before you could get a better deal with maybe a Spanish ship or a French ship. So you see how this would be kind of infuriating. It'd be like if I told y'all that you could only shop at Food Line, but maybe Walmart or Hills has a better deal. The Seeds of Independence, you have the Glorious Revolution in 1688, which establishes a constitutional monarchy in England. They come up with the English Bill of Rights in 1689, which guarantees some individual liberties. You have salutary neglect, which is a fancy way of saying that they really weren't there to supervise the colonies. They kind of let the colonies do their own thing, and then once those colonies kind of got independent, they didn't want to be controlled anymore. So the lack of control or that salutary neglect led the colonies to kind of govern themselves. And then when England did try to tighten up, then it made it kind of problematic because, colonies didn't want to be governed by somebody else when they'd already kind of established their own government. You have John Peter Zenger, who's a colonist put on trial over basic freedoms such as freedom of the press because he wrote some things about England that England did not like. Colonial society, plantation owners were top of society because they were the wealthiest and they owned the most land. Small farmers were most of the population, people who owned 50 acres to 100 acres of farmland. The second class was basically the role of women. And then the bottom of the rung were indentured servants and slaves. Indentured servants paid their way to America with 5 to 7 years worth of service. And then slaves usually never had a chance to leave slavery. You had the industrial North. They were more diversified economically than the South, meaning that they did a little bit of production on their own without having to send off the raw materials to England. There was not as much slavery in the North. One of the reasons why there wasn't as much slavery is because typically slavery was used on plantations and agricultural purposes. And in the North, not everything was based around agriculture. So because it was more diverse, it needed fewer slaves. There were harsher weather conditions, which also played into part of the reason why they went and diversified because they didn't have the ability to grow the things that the South did. Food exports, lumber, and industry were some of their things. One of the things the North was really big into was shipbuilding and iron making. And if you think about it, there was a lot more fishing, a lot more bays up north. So makes sense why they would get into shipbuilding. You have the agricultural South. They have a lot of the cash crops, tobacco, which everybody kind of knows, rice, which is really not as popular down in the South quite as much, at least not where we're at. It used to be pretty big in South Carolina. But if you go further south, like Mississippi, Alabama, especially down toward like the Delta, if you don't know what the Delta is, it's a very flat area down toward the Gulf Coast. You still see a lot of rice production because they can flood those flats near the ocean and get the rice going there. Indigo is a plant that they would use for dyes. So if they wanted to dye something, a lot of times it came from the indigo plant. Large plantations dominated the economy. There were plenty of small farms, and most of the small farms relied on indentured servitude or just the family to run it. A lot of times, small farms did not have slaves. Few towns and cities because of the agricultural lifestyle. Okay. So slavery in America, slaves would replace the Native Americans and indentured servants eventually, because when they first established colonies, they did try to make Native American slaves. Once they found out that they could use slaves that were imported from Africa, they kind of stopped indentured servitude, because with indentured servitude, somebody had to give up 50 acres of land. With slavery, you did not. Slavery was based on the triangle trade, and if you see here, it makes a triangle between Britain, Africa, and the New World. And at one point, I should say Europe here, because at one point the trade involved the Dutch, like Amsterdam, England, France, Britain. So all of these European countries that were empires were involved in the slave trade. But it ceased around the early part of the 1800s. And we'll get into that a little bit later. The Middle Passage is from Africa to the New World, this one right here, this red one. And that is where a lot of slaves died, was in the transition going from here to there, mainly because of very poor sanitation conditions on the boats that they were on. Okay. The witch trials in 1692 they took place in Salem, Massachusetts. Young girls accused people of being witches. The witches were often executed unless they exposed other witches, which kind of creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. Basically, they had to, in order to save their life, they had to lie about other people being a witch. Trials later suspended due to poor evidence, but not before quite a few people were executed. The Enlightenment stresses the use of reason and scientific method. Benjamin Franklin became most famous early American scientist. He wanted proof for things. He did a lot of experiments. The Enlightenment also led to increasing educational levels. It led to the founding of many colleges, although most of the colleges that started off were for religious training. One of the things that came out of the Enlightenment were philosophers. So one of those philosophers is John Locke, and he comes up with the idea of natural rights, meaning that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and property. And you will see that when we talk about the Declaration of Independence. He has a social contract. It's an agreement between a people and their government to protect their rights. Again, giving the idea of the government's there for specific reasons, such as protection. So you give up some of your freedom for the common good. Okay. The Baron of Montesquieu also comes up with the idea of separation of powers of government, basically the checks and balances. You don't allow any one part of the government to control everything. The Great Awakening is a revival of the Puritan faith. It gets young people back into the church. The big name during the Great Awakening is Jonathan Edwards. He gives a sermon called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. This revival led to new religious denominations that we'll talk about here shortly. But remember Great Awakening, remember Jonathan Edwards.